Today is January 8th, 2024. The time is 9 a.m. And I'm going to be reading an article from the Times of Israel. Energy Minister, no electricity or water to Gaza until abductees returned home. This October 12th, 2023, 9:46 a.m. Energy Minister Israel Katz says no electricity or water will be supplied to Gaza until those abducted during Hamas's shock onslaught are returned home. Humanitarian aid to Gaza? No electrical switch will be turned on. No water pump will be opened, and no fuel truck will enter until the Israeli abductees are returned home. He posted on X, formerly known as Twitter, humanitarianism for humanitarianism, and no one can preach morality to us, he writes. The fate of an estimated 150 people abducted and taken to the Gaza Strip during the devastating attack by Hamas terror group is still unclear. Let's look at the title here. This is a United Nations Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner. This is dated November 16th, 2023. And the title reads, Gaza, UN experts call on international community to prevent genocide against the Palestinian people. The international community, including not only states but also non-state actors such as businesses, must do everything it can to immediately end the risk of genocide against the Palestinian people and ultimately end Israeli apartheid, an occupation of the Palestinian territory, the experts say. This document right here, this is the this is the Rome Statute of the International Court. And it says the crime of apartheid means inhumane acts of a character similar to those referred to in paragraph 1, committed in the context of an institutionalized regime of systematic oppression and domination by one racial group over any other racial group or groups committed with the intention of maintaining that regime. I'm going to go up a little bit. And it says here, it says Article 7, Crimes Against Humanity. For the purpose of this statute, crime against humanity means any of the following acts when committed as part of a widespread or systematic attack directed against any civilian population with knowledge of the attack. The crime of apartheid. And here the United Nations Human Rights is clearly stating that Israel is an apartheid state. Here we're looking at resolution adopted by the General Assembly, prevention and punishment of the crime of genocide. And we want to go down here to Article 2. It says, in the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. And here, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. And here's a headline here. It says, Israel must stop using water as a weapon of war, November 17, 2023. Israel must allow clean water and fuel into Gaza to activate the water supply network and desalination plants in the besieged enclave before it's too late. A UN expert warned today, every hour that passes with Israel preventing the provisions of safe drinking water in the Gaza Strip and a brazen breach of international law puts Gazans at risk of dying of thirst and disease related to the lack of safe drinking water. The UN Relief and Works Agency has announced that the complete depletion of fuel in Gaza is having catastrophic consequences, including the collapse in water supply, sewage, sanitation service, telecommunications, and healthcare. I want to remind Israel that consciously preventing supplies needed for safe water from entering the Gaza Strip violates both international, humanitarian, and human rights law. The impact on public health and hygiene will be unimaginable and could result in more civilian deaths than the already colossal death toll from the bombardment of Gaza, he said. The expert warns that, as usual, children will be the first affected by the water and sanitation crises, particularly those under 5 years old and women. These frequently invisible casualties of war are preventable, and Israel must prevent them, he says. Israel must stop using water as a weapon of war. Article 7 of the Rome Statute intentionally depriving the civilian population of conditions of life calculated to bring about their destruction is an act of extermination and classified as a crime against humanity. Here's another title. UN experts urge Israel to stop using water as a weapon of war. This is dated November 17th, 2023. Geneva. Israel must stop using water as a weapon of war and allow clean water and fuel into Gaza to activate the water supply network before it's too late. Every hour that passes with Israel preventing the provisions of safe drinking water in the Gaza Strip in brazen breach of international law puts Gazan at risk of dying of thirst and disease related to the lack of safe drinking water. I want to remind Israel that consciously preventing supplies needed for safe water from entering the Gaza Strip violates both international, humanitarian, and human rights laws. It could result in more civilian deaths than already colossal death toll from the bombardment of Gaza. Here's a letter by the Secretary General to the President of Security Council invoking Article 99 of the United Nations Charter, dated December 6, 2023. Make this a little bigger. Dear Mr. President, I am writing this Article 99 of the United Nations Charter to bring to the attention of the Security Council a matter, in my opinion, may aggravate existing threats to the maintenance of international peace and security. More than 8 weeks of hostilities in Gaza and Israel have created appalling human suffering, physical destruction, and collective trauma across Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory. More than 1,200 people were brutally killed, including 33 children, and thousands were injured in the abhorrent acts of terror by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups on October 7, 2023, which I have repeatedly condemned. Some 250 people were abducted, including 34 children, more than 130 of whom are still captive. They must be immediately and unconditionally released. Accounts of sexual violence during the attacks are appalling. Civilians throughout Gaza face grave danger. Since the start of Israel's military operation, more than 15,000 people have reportedly been killed, over 40% of whom were children. Thousands of others have been injured. More than half of all homes have been destroyed. Some 80% of the population of 2.2 million has been forcibly displaced, and into increasingly smaller areas. More than 1.1 million people have sought refuge and UNRWA facilities across Gaza, creating overcrowded, undignified, and unhygienic conditions. Others have nowhere to shelter and find themselves on the streets. Explosive remnants of war are rendering areas uninhabitable. There is no effective protection of civilians. The healthcare system in Gaza is collapsing. Hospitals have turned into battlegrounds. Only 14 hospitals out of 36 facilities are even partially functional. Two major hospitals in South Gaza are operating at 3 times their bed capacity and are running out of basic supplies and fuel. They are also sheltering thousands of displaced persons. Under these circumstances, more people will die untreated in the coming days and weeks. Nowhere is safe in Gaza. Amid constant bombardment by the Israel Defense Forces, and without shelter or the essentials to survive, I expect public order to completely break down soon due to the desperate conditions rendering even limited humanitarian assistance impossible. An even worse situation could unfold, including epidemic diseases, increased pressure for mass displacement into neighboring countries. In Resolution 2712 of 2023, the Security Council calls for the scaling up of the provision of such supplies to meet the humanitarian needs of the civilian population, especially children. The current conditions are making it impossible for meaningful humanitarian operations to be conducted. We are nevertheless preparing options for monitoring the implementation of the resolution, even if we recognize that in the present circumstance that is untenable. While delivery of supplies to Rafah continues, quantities are insufficient and have dropped since the pause came to an end. We are simply unable to reach those in need inside Gaza. The capacity of the United Nations and its humanitarian partners have been decimated by supply shortages, lack of fuel, interrupted communication, and growing insecurity. Humanitarian personnel have joined the vast majority of Gazans, civilians, in evacuating to South Gaza ahead of advancing military operations. At least 130 UN RWA colleagues have been killed, many with their families. We are facing a severe risk of collapse of the humanitarian system. The situation is fast deteriorating into a catastrophe with potentially irreversible implications for Palestinians as a whole and for peace and security in the region. Such an outcome must be avoided at all costs. The international community has a responsibility to use all its influence to prevent further escalation and end this crisis. I urge the members of the Security Council to press to avert a humanitarian catastrophe. I reiterate my appeal for the humanitarian ceasefire to be declared. This is urgent. The civilian population must be spared from greater harm. With a humanitarian ceasefire, the means of survival can be restored. The humanitarian assistance can be delivered in a safe and timely manner across the Gaza Strip. Please accept, Mr. President, the assurance of my highest consideration, Antonio Guterres. And here's another article, and this one is dated December 20th, 2023. Barely a drop of safe water to drink in Gaza. UN aid agency warns. As the UN Security Council was slated to meet for a third consecutive day on Wednesday, and a new push for consensus to pause the fighting in Gaza, the head of the UN Children's Fund, UNICEF, warned that without safe water, many more children will soon die from disease. Access to sufficient amounts of clean water is a matter of life and death. Children in Gaza have barely a drop to drink. Children and their families are having to use water from unsafe sources that are highly salinated or polluted. Without safe water, many children will die from deprivation and disease in the coming days. The humanitarian alert came after more than 10 weeks of near constant bombardment of the enclave in response to Hamas's terror attacks. I'm going to read this a little bit more. Alarming as the lack of drinking water is, hundreds of thousands of displaced people, half of them children, also remain in desperate need of food, shelter, medicine, and protection. At least 50% of wash facilities providing basic water and sanitation services have been damaged or destroyed in Gaza. As UNICEF warned that the impact of this situation on children was particularly worrying because they are more susceptible to diarrhea, disease, and malnutrition. Already, officials recorded almost 20 times the monthly average of reported cases of diarrhea among children under the age of 5, in addition to increases of cases of scabies, lice, chickenpox, skin rashes, and more than 160,000 cases of acute respiratory infection. I want to bring you back here to this letter from Antonio Guterres, letter by the Secretary General to the President of the Security Council invoking Article 99 of the United Nations Charter. In his letter, I find it appalling that he never once, and I'm searching this document for the word water, he never mentions the fact that the Palestinian people do not have water. You have to ask yourself why. I don't have it pulled up right now. But this person here, you can look it up for yourself. This person right here, he was awarded the Theodore Herzl Award.